Hi everyone, so I wanted to use today's video to talk about some books that I think are especially good for beginners or people who are mostly people who have read YA and now want to get into adult books or just books in general that are not young adult. So the first thing that I want to say is I have not read that much in general, but I do have a couple of things to recommend. I have 5 books to recommend, and I guess since I haven't read that much, I will probably make part 2 and 3 and so on for this type of video as I read more and I find more things that are appropriate to this theme subject. And I also want to say that I really tried to find things that I thought would be appreciated by those who read YA, because I do watch a lot of booktubers that mostly read that sort of thing, and I think I have a pretty good idea of what they tend to look for in a book. So I have, first of all, the first book that I want to talk about is Nothing by Jane Taylor. I made a review on this. It's one of my first videos. And I said that technically it is a YA book, or it is marketed as such at least, but I think it's very different from what I expect and what I think most people expect from YA. First of all, there's no romance at all, not even an ounce of romance, and I think that's something that's more or less expected. Or at least like a strong friendship or something like that is expected in YA books, and there's no such thing in this book. It's very dark and bleak, and and I don't want to say, I want to say that there's in the story there's rape. It happens more or less in the middle of the story, and I don't think it was handled the ideal way by the author, nor by the characters themselves. So I just wanted to warn you about it. It's it's not very graphic, and it's a very short read, so but I did want to say it. It's a very short read, like I said. It's easy to read in one day, but it's not necessarily easy to digest, so to speak, because like I said, it's kind of a depressing read, and it's not really the kind of thing that you would want to read again, I think. I think it makes a strong impression just by reading it once. That's what I want to say. Basically, this book is about, I'm just getting to that, right? But this book is about a kid who is really just about a group of kids who are in middle school, and one of them wakes up one day. No, he doesn't wake up. He stands up in the middle of class and he says that life has no meaning and that there's no point in going to school and that sort of thing. And all these other children are trying to convince him to change his mind or to admit that he's wrong or something like that. And they basically bully him into saying that it isn't true, because they're pretty much, this isn't said directly by the author, but I would consider that that's because they're scared of thinking that that could be the truth. And a lot of things happen. They basically start doing some really unethical things because of these emotions that they have, and the book just escalates to really dark places, I would say. So the second one is All You Need Is Kill by Hiroshi Sakurasaka. This is one of the few ones that I don't really have to warn you about anything. I think it's pretty lighthearted. Well, not quite at the end, but it's the writing style is pretty simple, and I think it's a particularly easy read. It's also very short. And this is about a Japanese man who, there's actually a movie made from this book. It's called The Edge of Tomorrow. It came out like maybe 3 years ago. And this is about a guy who he's part of a like a military group, Japanese military group, in which they combat a particular type of alien that started invading Japan. And basically he dies near the beginning, you guys, it's not a spoiler. He dies near the beginning, but then he wakes up the same day, and he keeps dying and waking up the same day, like repeating the same day over and over. And it's very interesting because he has to both combat those aliens and find out like what's going on with that repeating. The characters are interesting, they feel like real people, and also it's just a very well crafted story, so I recommend it to anyone really. So yeah, I think you guys, well, I think anyone who usually reads YA would find this really enjoyable. So the next one is another one that I'm kind of iffy about. I read this very recently, and it's called Other Weapons by Luisa Valenzuela. And this book is very short. It's a short story, very intense, about a woman who doesn't have her memories. The story starts at a point where she doesn't have her memories and wants to find out. Well, she doesn't exactly want to find out what happened, but it's kind of complicated. But there's kind of this feeling from the beginning of the story that the people who say they are her family, I guess, there's a man who seems to be her husband, and you're not really sure what's happening and who he really is, even though it all seems to point to him actually being her husband. But it's there's a lot of mystery to it at the beginning, and like I said, it's very intense. There's actually, I also have to mention this, there's an instance of something that would easily seem like rape in the story. Basically there's I don't want to say much because it's obviously part of the plot, but there's a part of the story in which a character is being someone is having really rough sex with this character, and there's no like, nobody said yes or no before that. We don't have much context for that scene. So this character is just like having really rough and aggressive sex with this other one, and the writing style and all these things that happen around them make it seem like it isn't consensual. So I just want to mention that it was kind of harsh for me when I read it, because there was a lot of focus on the sex and how it was very aggressive, right? But I just wanted to put it out there. Like I said, it's very short. You can read it in a couple hours. I enjoyed it a lot. I still, since it was a recently read one, I still kind of think that I haven't not fully grasped what really what the story really has fully, and that sort of thing. But it has a lot of depth. I can tell you that there's a lot of things to be said about this story, and it's just really, it's a small mysterious read, so to speak, and I think people will not necessarily enjoy it as you read it, but I think that's the kind of reading, the kind of story that really ends up being in your mind, even like months after you read it, because there was a lot of things to unpack there, I guess. So the next book is also one of my favorites. I read it for the first time a long time ago. It's The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, yet another very short read. And this is a story about a man who wakes up one day and he has become some sort of like insect or human insect. It's a little ambiguous how exactly he looks. And that sort of, well, it's not quite ambiguous. He's supposed to look like something disgusting or something like that. But basically, he used to be the person who maintained his family because he was the one who worked. But once he becomes unable to do it because he's become an insect, then his family has to deal with it and see what they will do with him. I don't want to say much because it, again, super short, but this is also really strong, I think. The first time that I read it, I felt that it was almost kind of comical, and I also am recommending this particularly because from the beginning it seems to have, it's very entertaining. um I don't think there's any part in this book that feels like it's not necessary, um which is what you'd expect from like 150-page book or something, almost pretty much like 100 pages or less. But it's definitely worth it to read it, I think. Anyone really, I think, would enjoy and I guess understand this in a way. And the last book that I want to talk about is Watchmen by Alan Moore. This is the longest one. And I think it was the one that took me the longest to read out of all of these. But in any case, this is of course a comic book. It's really about a pretty unlikable main character, and I know that's something not very expected, I guess. I mean, YA has unlikable main characters, but usually they're not meant to be. In this story, the main characters are not at all trying to be seen as like role models or anything good necessarily. I think the author is trying to criticize certain views, not views, but criticize certain ways that people think sometimes, and kind of like emphasize on the hypocrisy of his own main characters. And there's a lot of almost like, I guess, not self-criticism as in the author criticizing himself, but it's almost like the story is being critical of itself in this book. And it's also very heavy in terms of the themes and the kind of things that it has. There's again a scene of attempted rape in this comic book, graphic novel, whatever, and it's a little hard to see. They also made a movie on this one, but the story is again very well crafted. It's very interesting. All the characters are very interesting. They feel like real people. They are very flawed, and that makes it very interesting. I think that this is one of those examples of characters that are unlikable being in which the author really pulls that off very well. Because I read a lot of reviews before I read this book saying that the characters were impossible to like, pretty much all of them, and I was like, you know what, I think that the author is making a good job of making you empathize with the characters even if you don't like them. And that's something that the reader needs to be able to do that just as much as the author needs to be able to convey that to the reader. So I guess you have to be in a certain mindset to understand this book. Obviously not saying that if you don't like this you're wrong, or I guess you didn't have the right context to it, but it could be said like maybe because maybe sometimes books we see them differently depending on what part of our lives we were in when we read them, and that sort of thing, and what other things we read before and such, and how we view novels and what they're supposed to do, and what we think of books and their purpose in the first place. So in any case, this story is about a man. Its main character is a guy who, he's a man, really, he's about 40, I think. He's possibly the most unlikable. Well, there's two particularly unlikable characters, but he's one of them, I would say. And he basically wants to he has a suspicion about something. This is set in the 80s, during the Cold War, and there's a lot of like political references in here. Um, he's used to be part of a group of people who were vigilantes. Is that how you pronounce it? Okay. They were like clandestine um, heroes, you know, superheroes. They were like these um, group of people who wanted to make justice by themselves and that sort of thing. But the thing is that that is very deconstructed in this story, because it ends up being more trouble than it's worth, and people kind of like react against it, because it's not like an idealized view on superheroes. It's actually the opposite. It's very negative, and like a really pessimistic take, I guess, on superheroes. So I really like this story. It has a lot to offer, and well, like I said, I was saying about the plot, but this guy basically has a suspicion that someone is going to plot something, and he wants to like, I guess, uncover the mystery, like know what's behind everything, and he's kind of like talking to these people, you know, um behind this is all after a friend of his is murdered, right? And he wants to like, he doesn't want to unite, but he wants to like he's starting to talk to these people that used to be part of the group with him, or you know, these people who are also part of this whole superhero thing, um and kind of like I kind of like side with him in his suspicions. And I won't say much more. I mean, there's a lot of in this book to read, but you really have to, I guess, discover things by yourself. It's a great read. I just want to say that. I definitely am confident in recommending that. But do be aware that you are not supposed to like the characters, and you probably won't like them. So yeah, that's the books that I wanted to recommend to you for now, for this kind of thing. And I hope that you really like these reads if you read any of these, and I hope that you enjoy this video. Bye.